She stood by the window, dressed in white, her hands trembling as violins played softly in the hall below. Everyone saw a beautiful bride. No one saw the terrified girl inside. Welcome to Noah's Stories, where we uncover the unheard, the unseen, and the unforgettable. Today, you'll meet Sophia Lane, a quiet soul who never asked for riches, never dreamed of mansions, only for a little kindness. But when fate forced her into the arms of a powerful billionaire, what began as cold obligation would soon ignite something neither of them saw coming. The sky was silver the morning she married him, not bright, not stormy, just grey, like the pause between a sigh and a tear. A stillness that settled deep in her chest as she stared at her reflection, wearing a wedding dress stitched for a fairy tale she never asked to be in. Sophia Lane was 26, but her eyes carried more years than her birth certificate could ever prove. She had known silence more than laughter, duty more than dreams. Her life had been a series of quiet sacrifices and whispered hopes, none of which had prepared her for the moment she was about to step into. Downstairs, the violinist played something soft, something elegant. Guests murmured in polished tones, sipping from golden-rimmed glasses, unaware that the bride had not chosen this path. They saw lace and satin. They saw beauty and grace. What they didn't see was the young woman behind the veil, trembling, uncertain, and completely alone. She adjusted her sleeves, not out of vanity, but because her hands wouldn't stop shaking. There was no one beside her, no mother to fix her hair, no sister to tell her she looked stunning, no friend to whisper that it was okay to cry, just silence and expectations. How had it come to this? The answer was simple. Really, it was never about love. It was about a name, a transaction, a promise her uncle made to a man powerful enough to crush empires with a single word. Damien Voss. The name sent quiet ripples through every room it entered. He wasn't known for kindness, but for precision, for wealth, for control, and now, for choosing a wife half his age, a woman who had never even dreamed of marrying a billionaire, let alone one who barely spoke more than 3 words to her during their engagement. She hadn't said yes out of love. She had said yes because she didn't know how to say no anymore. Because when you've been surviving for so long, sometimes the promise of peace, even cold, calculated peace, feels like something close to safety. Sophia had grown up learning how to disappear in a room full of people, after losing her mother at 14 and her father a year later to grief more than illness. She had been passed from one relative to another like a forgotten heirloom. Each new home offered her food and shelter, but never love. She learned early that asking for kindness meant being disappointed, so she stopped asking. Instead, she painted. She painted late at night when the house was quiet, when no one could question the strange girl with charcoal on her fingers and dreams in her sketchpad. Her art was the only space where she felt seen. It was her rebellion, soft, silent, but hers. She wanted to be invisible, but part of her still wished that someone might truly see her. Then one day, that someone saw her, but not for the reasons she hoped. Her uncle, always a businessman before a guardian, had connections, and one of those connections had a problem. Damien Voss was powerful but alone. He needed an heir, an image, a name beside his in the press that could soften the sharp corners of his reputation. A young, gentle wife would do just fine. Sophia fit the role perfectly, quiet, uncomplicated, and completely without power to refuse. The proposal wasn't romantic. There was no candlelit dinner, no down-on-one-knee promises. There was simply an envelope slid across a polished oak table, with her name typed neatly at the top. She stared at it for a long time before picking up the pen. "Will I get to keep painting?" she asked softly. Her uncle blinked. "He won't care what you do, as long as you don't cause problems." So she signed. She wasn't afraid of Damien, not exactly. She was afraid of disappearing even more than she already had, of becoming a trophy on a shelf in a mansion too large for conversation, of losing what little of herself still remained. But she also believed foolishly, perhaps, that maybe, deep down, this was her chance to finally rest. Maybe he'd ignore her, and she'd be free to live quietly, with a studio and paints, and windows that let in morning light. Maybe she could find peace. Now, as the ceremony began, Sophia felt her heart racing like it hadn't in years. She stepped slowly down the aisle, each step echoing in her ears like a drum. Damien stood at the end, tall and still, wearing a suit cut from midnight cloth. His expression was unreadable, his gaze cool but not cruel. When their eyes met, she felt nothing, not fear, not warmth, just the deep ache of uncertainty. He didn't smile, he didn't frown, he simply held out his hand, and she placed hers in his dot. The ceremony passed like a dream, or maybe a fog. She heard the words, but they felt distant, like waves crashing on a shore she couldn't reach. Vows were exchanged, rings were slipped on fingers, applause rose around them, but none of it felt real, until they were alone. The car ride to the estate was silent. Sophia stared out the window, watching trees blur past as her new husband scrolled through messages on his phone. He didn't look at her, he didn't speak, but she didn't expect him to. She didn't know what to expect. When they reached the mansion, a towering structure more suited for royalty than for love, he opened the door for her, but didn't offer his hand. She stepped out slowly, her dress brushing against marble steps older than her. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made your breath feel too loud. A maid greeted them and led Sophia to the room that would be hers. Separate from his. "I assume you'll want time to settle in," Damien said as he stood in the doorway. His voice was low, clipped, almost businesslike. She nodded. "Thank you." Then, just as he turned to leave, something strange happened. He paused. "You're afraid of me," he said. It wasn't a question. Sophia looked up, startled. She searched for something honest to say, but all that came out was a whisper. "I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of what this life might do to me." For a heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. Not warmth, not regret, but recognition. Then he nodded once and disappeared down the hallway. Sophia sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the shadows dancing across the ceiling. This wasn't a fairy tale. This wasn't a nightmare. It was something else, something she couldn't name yet. But deep inside, a quiet thought stirred. What if the most unexpected stories didn't begin with love, but with the absence of it? And what if that space, that silence, was where something honest could finally grow? It had been 7 days since the wedding, and not once had Damien entered her room. Not for a conversation, not for a question, not even by mistake. Sophia didn't know if she felt relieved or rejected, maybe both. Each morning she woke to the soft rustle of curtains pulled back by a maid whose name she hadn't yet learned. Breakfast was left on a tray by the door. Damien had meals in his study, meetings in his office, and phone calls that stretched past midnight. If it weren't for the faint scent of his cologne in the hallway, she might have believed she was alone in the house. But he was there, somewhere, just like her, existing, but not living. And yet something inside her refused to shrink, even in this quiet. Maybe it was the part of her that once stayed up painting until dawn, or the small, stubborn voice in her heart that kept whispering, "This isn't the end of you." Sophia Lane. She explored the mansion one room at a time, not because she was curious, but because she needed to move, to feel the floor under her bare feet and the sunlight on her arms. She found a library filled with books no one had touched in years, a music room where a piano stood in perfect condition, but covered in dust. A garden that looked like it had once bloomed with pride, now half forgotten beneath tangled vines. And one afternoon, she found the door. It was down a quiet hallway at the very back of the estate, almost hidden behind a tapestry. The knob was cold when she turned it, the hinges creaked, and inside, the air smelled of old memories and something else, something gentle. Paint. Her breath caught in her chest. The room was flooded with natural light. Canvases lined the far wall, most of them unfinished. A row of brushes sat dry on a workbench, beside open jars of color long since hardened. In the center of the room was an easel, still holding a half-painted portrait of a woman whose eyes were soft and kind. Sophia stepped forward, instinctively brushing a layer of dust from the table, and something in her heart cracked open. He was a painter. He had been. She didn't know how long she stood there. Minutes, maybe longer. But for the first time in days, she felt like she was breathing again. Later that evening, when the house was bathed in warm gold and silence, Damien appeared in the doorway of her room. "You found it," he said. His voice startled her, not because it was loud, but because it wasn't. It was softer than before. Almost unsure, she turned slowly. "Was it hers?" she asked. He didn't need to ask who she meant. He nodded once, looking past her, not at her. Sophia didn't speak. She knew this wasn't the moment to fill the silence. Some silences carry too much weight to be broken carelessly. "She painted with a light hand," he said quietly. She used to say you could always tell what a person feared by how they held a brush. Sophia looked down at her own hands. "And what do you think I fear?" she asked gently. He looked at her for the first time then. Really looked. "You hold your hands like you're waiting for someone to take them away." Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry, not in front of him. "Not yet. Clara died 8 years ago," he continued. "Car accident. We never had children. After that, I stopped painting. Stopped everything." She could see it now, behind the mask of control he wore so well. Not coldness, but grief. A grief so deeply buried, it had frozen inside him like winter. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded, then added, more to himself than to her, "She was nothing like you, but she would have liked you." The next morning, there was a canvas waiting for her in the art room. No note, no instructions, just a new canvas and a set of clean brushes. Sophia stood there, staring at them for a long time. Her fingers itched to hold the brush, but her heart was still unsure. She picked it up anyway. At first, her strokes were small, careful, but with each line, each color, something within her began to loosen. Hours passed unnoticed. For the first time in what felt like years, she felt seen. Not by him, not yet, but by herself. When Damien passed the room that night and saw the soft light spilling into the hallway, he paused. He didn't enter. He just stood there, watching her through the crack in the door. She was painting with her whole soul. He didn't know why it moved him, but it did. Something about the way she bent close to the canvas, whispering more with her silence than words ever. Cliff made him feel like he was standing at the edge of something sacred. He turned and walked away. But that night, he didn't work late. He sat by the window of his room, watching the moonlight spill across the marble floor, and thought about how strange it was that a girl he barely knew had reopened a door in him that had been locked for years. Neither of them knew it yet. But something had shifted. Not love, not yet, but something softer, something braver, a beginning. Asterisk, she didn't hear him coming. It was late. Later than she usually stayed in the art room, and the world outside the tall windows had turned to silver. Mist. Sophia was painting in the dim glow of a single lamp, lost in the rhythm of her brush. So she didn't notice the quiet footsteps until he was right behind her. "You don't paint like someone who's just filling time," Damien said quietly. Her hand froze mid-stroke. He didn't mean to startle her. She could tell. His voice had a strange softness, like it had been wrapped in something fragile before it reached her. She turned slightly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I never painted for time," she said. "I painted to survive it." A pause stretched between them, thick with words neither knew how to say. He stepped closer, just enough to look at the canvas, a woman standing on a cliff, her back to the world, arms wide open to the wind. "You paint women like they're trying to fly," he murmured. She gave a small smile. "Maybe they are." He didn't ask what the painting meant. He just stood there, quietly, and for the first time since they had exchanged vows, they shared a silence that wasn't empty, but safe. That night changed something between them. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't magic. But the next morning, her breakfast tray arrived with a small white flower resting on the napkin, the kind that bloomed in early spring and didn't belong to any arrangement in the house. And the morning after that, she found the books in the library had been dusted, and a worn poetry collection, had been left open on her favorite chair, a folded corner marking a poem about resilience. Neither of them mentioned these things, but they kept happening. Damien started passing by the art room more often. Sometimes he asked about her paintings, sometimes he didn't say anything at all. But he came, and Sophia, once so sure that no one would ever notice her unless she made no noise, began to feel the strange warmth of being quietly seen. She started asking questions, too, about the house, about the way the light fell through the stained glass windows in the west wing, about the small scars on his left hand that looked like they came from something other than paperwork. He answered some, dodged others, but never walked away. And then, one afternoon, everything shifted. It was raining, the kind of gentle rain that made the whole house feel like it was exhaling. Damien stood by the window of the study, watching water trace slow paths down the glass. Sophia knocked once before entering. She wasn't sure why. It wasn't like she needed permission. Not anymore. But something about his silence still felt like it deserved respect. "I was thinking," she said, careful with each word. "Maybe the garden needs a little attention." He turned, surprised. "The garden," she nodded. "I know it's not mine, but I thought it might be nice to bring something back to life." He didn't speak right away, and then, quietly, "Clara loved that garden." Sophia looked down at her hands. "I'm not her. I know that. I know you're not." And then, a moment so simple, it nearly passed unnoticed. He said, "But maybe it's time someone loved it again." That evening, she found a pair of gloves and a small set of garden tools resting on the bench by the door. The next day, she began. It wasn't easy. The weeds were stubborn, the soil hard. But Sophia worked with a kind of quiet devotion, pulling each dead root from the earth like it was a memory that needed releasing. Her hands ached, but she didn't stop. Damien watched her from the window again. He didn't say anything, just watched Dot. And then, one day, he came outside. He didn't help at first, just sat nearby with his sleeves rolled up, watching her work. In the sunlight, eventually, he picked up a spade. By the end of the afternoon, they had cleared the wild roses. Their conversations grew, not just longer, but deeper, about little things, like what she missed about city life, or how he used to draw faces on napkins as a child. Then about harder things, her parents, his guilt, the years that lived between them like unspoken chapters. One evening, while they sat on the stone bench beside the garden, Damien spoke words that made her breath catch, "You know, the night before the wedding, I almost called it off." She turned to him, startled. "Why?" "Because I thought it would hurt less to be alone than to share my life with someone who didn't want to be here." She looked at him for a long moment, and now, he exhaled. "Now, I'm not so sure." Sophia didn't know what to say. She wasn't ready to call it love. She wasn't even sure if what she felt was trust. But for the first time since she had stepped into this strange life, she felt something settle quietly in her chest. Hope. And then something happened that neither of them expected. That night, Damien disappeared, not from the house but from her life again. No visits, no quiet garden moments, no books left open or flowers tucked into napkins. 3 days, 4, almost a week. The maid brought a note to her room on the 6th morning. "Business trip, back soon." No explanation, no signature. Just like that, he was gone. Sophia stood in the garden the next day, gloves in hand, but didn't move. The soil had begun to soften. New buds had started to show. But inside her, the silence was loud again. Why had he left so suddenly? And why? Why did it hurt? Asterisk, the storm didn't start in the sky. It started in her chest. It had been 10 days since Damien left. 10 days of quiet trays at her door. 10 days of unanswered questions blooming like wild vines in her mind. And now, as thunder rolled in the distance and dark clouds gathered outside the tall windows, Sophia stood at the edge of the garden and tried to stop herself from falling apart. She didn't know where he had gone. No call, no second note, only silence. And after everything they had shared, the quiet conversations, the painting room, the garden, the silence felt louder than it ever had before. People didn't just vanish like that, not unless they were trying to disappear. And maybe that was the part that hurt the most, because she had started to believe he saw her, not just as a contract, not as a solution to some family obligation, but as a person, a woman, someone whose hands could bring color back into things he thought were long dead. And now she was back to wondering if it had all been a kindness borrowed for a season. The storm outside cracked open, thunder echoing across the hills, but Sue didn't move. She sat alone in the art room, a half-finished painting before her. This one was different. The brushstrokes were bolder, the colors more chaotic. It looked like confusion, like longing, like grief. She had never realized before how much of her story bled into her paintings. Until now, she didn't sleep that night. And then, on the 12th day, the phone in the hall rang. It was old, one of those antique rotary phones no one ever used. She stared at it for a second, wondering if she was dreaming. Then she picked it up. "Sophie." The voice was unfamiliar, deep, with a clipped accent. "Yes, this is Mr. Graves. I'm Damien's attorney. I need you to come to the city." She felt her stomach twist. "Is something wrong?" "I'd rather not explain on the phone. He listed you as an emergency contact. Please come to West Hill General, room 417. And just like that, the line went dead. Sophia's hands trembled as she set the receiver down. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't call for a driver. She packed a small bag, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and was out the door in minutes. The city felt colder than she remembered. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe it was what she might find on the other end of this trip. She hated hospitals. The smell, the sterile quiet, the way people passed through the halls like ghosts carrying hope or heartbreak. Room 417 was at the end of a long corridor. She pushed the door open slowly. Damien was there, lying in the bed, pale, quiet, and more human than she had ever seen him. There were machines, 4 lines, a monitor that beeped softly. A nurse adjusting something on the wall nodded at Sophia and slipped out, giving her space. She stepped closer. He opened his eyes, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, barely above a whisper, "You came, you left," she said, her voice tight. "I didn't want to," he replied. "Then why?" Damien looked away. There was something behind his silence. Not shame, not guilt, but fear. "I didn't want you to see me like this." She blinked, confused. "Like what?" "Weak." Her heart broke a little at that. "Damien, no one's strong all the time." He looked at her then, eyes glassy. "I've been sick for years. I thought it was manageable. But a few weeks ago it got worse. They think it's something in my blood. Maybe genetic, maybe not. They don't know yet." Her fingers clenched at her side. "So you ran." "I didn't want to pull you into this. I didn't want to make you stay out of pity." Her breath caught. "You still think I'm here because I was forced?" He didn't answer. So she stepped closer, knelt beside the bed and looked into his eyes. "You gave me a house, Damien, but I built something inside it. I planted something real, not just in the garden, in myself. I'm not that scared girl anymore, and I'm not here because I have to be." She reached for his hand. "I'm here because I choose to be." He swallowed hard. A tear slipped from the corner of his eye. He tried to hide it, but she saw, and instead of flinching away, she squeezed his hand. "You don't have to protect me from your pain," she said softly. "Not if you want me to be part of your life." For the first time since she had met him, Damien didn't argue, didn't build walls. He just let her stay beside him. Let her hold the hand he'd once tried so hard to keep closed. The next few days blurred into one another. Hospital corridors, test results, quiet meals in the waiting lounge. And through it all, Sophia never left his side. And in the quiet moments when he was asleep and the world outside slowed, she borrowed a canvas from a local shop, propped it by the window, and painted the way he looked when he let himself feel. The crease of his brow when he was trying to stay strong. The softness in his mouth when he watched her without speaking. She painted him not as a billionaire, not as a broken man, but as someone learning to be whole again. When he saw it, days later, he was silent for a long time. Then he whispered, "That doesn't look like me. It looks like the part of you that you've been hiding," she said. "The part that deserves to be seen." And for the first time, Damien smiled. A real one, not practiced, not polite, but warm, and full of something that almost looked like belief. The past doesn't knock. It barges in when you least expect it. It was supposed to be a day of peace. The morning light filtered gently through the hospital blinds, casting long golden streaks across Damien's sheets. Sophia had just returned with his favorite tea, the kind she had to walk 3 blocks to find, because the hospital cafeteria brewed everything like medicine. He was sitting up now, stronger, smiling more easily, and every part of her heart had begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were turning a corner. She had almost forgotten what fear tasted like, until the woman in red appeared. Sophia saw her through the glass first, tall, composed, the kind of elegance that spoke not of warmth, but of power. Her heels didn't make a sound, but her presence did, like cold wind in an open room. She didn't knock, just walked in, and stopped. Sophia turned, tea still in her hand, heart still halfway in hope. Damien's face went pale. The woman tilted her head. "So it's true," she said, eyes flicking between them. "You really went through with it." There was a silence thick enough to drown in. Damien opened his mouth, then closed it again. "Vivian." Sophia froze. Vivian. The name hung in the air like smoke from an old fire. "Your?" Sophia asked softly. "Former fiancé," Damien said, his voice low. Vivian smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh darling, don't be modest. We were more than engaged. We were practically married, until your little vanishing act." Sophia didn't speak. She didn't need to. Every muscle in her body had tensed. Vivian walked closer. "And now, what? You marry someone half your age while you lie in hospital beds pretending to be a man with a soul." "Vivian, stop," Damien said sharply, his tone unlike anything Sophia had heard before. But Vivian wasn't listening. "Tell me, dear," she said. turning to Sophia, her voice like poisoned honey. "Did he tell you why he left me at the altar? Why he vanished from our life without a word?" Sophia held her gaze. "No," she said calmly, "but I imagine there's more to it than you're telling." Vivian laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Oh, you are adorable. Let me give you a gift, since you seem so attached. Look into his family's past. Look at the last woman who stood beside him when things got hard. Ask what happened to her." Damien sat up straighter, wincing slightly. "Vivian, that's enough." Vivian leaned in close, lips just inches from Damien's ear. "Secrets rot, Damien, and you're running out of time." Then, with one final glance at Sophia, something between pity and threat, she walked out. The door clicked shut. Sophia didn't speak for a long moment. Finally, Damien looked at her. "I'm sorry, what was she talking about?" He shook his head, eyes heavy. "It's complicated, and old, and something I've spent too many years trying to bury." Sophia crossed the room and sat beside him. "I don't care how old it is. If I'm going to walk beside you in life, I need to know what I'm walking through." He nodded slowly. "I had a brother once," he began. "Younger, smarter, better, in almost every way. We were inseparable as kids. But he had a heart condition. We all thought he was getting better. And then one summer, he collapsed during a hike." He paused. I froze. I was supposed to be the one watching him. He was just lying there, and I panicked. I didn't call for help soon enough. When they found us, he was still alive, but barely. He didn't make it through the night. Sophia reached for his hand, but he looked away. My parents never said it out loud, but I saw it in their eyes. "You should have saved him." And I carried that guilt into everything. School, work, my relationships. I didn't let anyone get too close, because I believed I would fail them too. And Vivian, we were set up through our families. On paper, we were perfect. But she didn't love me. Not really. She loved the name, the power, the lifestyle. When my symptoms started showing a few years ago, she suggested I keep it quiet. Said illness didn't fit the brand. Sophia felt something twist inside her. I realized, Damien continued, that marrying her would be a different kind of death. So I walked away, left everything, and started over. Sophia studied his face, the lines of grief and guilt, the cracks he'd tried to plaster over with money and detachment. "You think that makes you unworthy of love?" she asked softly. He didn't answer, so she leaned in, placing her palm gently on his chest. "Damien, everyone has ghosts, but the fact that you carry yours with this much care tells me you still have a heart worth trusting." He blinked. "Even after everything?" She nodded. "Especially after everything." A single tear slid down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He let it fall. That night, he slept more peacefully than he had in weeks. But the next morning brought another surprise. Sophia received a letter delivered by hand with no return address. Inside was a single newspaper clipping, yellowed, fragile, and dated nearly 20 years back. The headline read, "Local boy dies on mountain trail. Brother under scrutiny after delayed rescue." Her hands shook as she held the paper. On the back, scribbled in sharp ink, "You don't know who he really is." Sophia looked out the hospital window. Damien was resting, unaware, but something had shifted. The past wasn't finished with them yet, and she had a choice to make: dig deeper and risk uncovering truths that could destroy what they were building, or walk away before the pain touched her too. She folded the letter, her chest tight, and whispered into the quiet, "What else are you hiding, Damien?" Love is never quiet at the end. It either whispers a promise, or a goodbye. The letter burned in Sophia's pocket for 3 days. She didn't speak of it, didn't show it to Damien, not because she didn't trust him, but because she wasn't sure she trusted herself. The words on that fragile newsprint had planted a seed, a doubt, and once doubt takes root in her heart trying to heal, it spreads fast. She kept trying to look at him the same way she had before, to see only the man who had grown into her life like a quiet miracle. But now, every time she saw him sleeping or read the softness in his eyes, the question echoed louder, "What else don't I know about you?" It wasn't the headline that haunted her. It was the fear behind it. The idea that Damien hadn't just run from the world, but from himself, and from something darker he'd never spoken of. Then came the second letter, slipped under her door. No name, no envelope, just a single sentence, scribbled in rushed handwriting. "Go to the lake house. You'll find the truth buried beneath the stairs." At first, she tried to ignore it, tossed it into the fire grate, where it curled and blackened. but the words refused to leave her mind. So 2 nights later, while Damien was asleep and the nurses rotated shifts, Sophia slipped away. She borrowed one of the estate drivers and gave vague instructions. The lake house was a property Damien had mentioned once. In passing, too many memories, he had said. I haven't been there in years. That was all. The place looked like a memory the world forgot. Vines crept along the faded porch. Dust covered the windows. But when she stepped inside, the air felt strangely untouched, like time had stopped here. Waiting. She found the stairs easily. They led to a small cellar, dark and cool. At first, it looked empty, just crates and old tools. But behind a stack of canvases, she saw it, a loose panel in the wall. Inside was a small chest. She hesitated before opening it, her hands trembling. Then slowly, she lifted the lid. Onside were dozens of letters, most unopened, all addressed to Damien. The return address read, Michael Graves, his younger brother. Sophia's heart dropped. She flipped through them. The earliest was postmarked, a year after Michael's death. But as she read, she understood. Michael hadn't died that night on the trail. He had survived barely, but had been sent away. A remote care facility, specialized treatment, out of sight, out of mind. And Damien hadn't known. There were medical documents too, a single note from Damien's father, cold and curt. Michael lives, but you will not see him again. You forfeited that right. Sophia collapsed to her knees, letters tumbling around her. He hadn't failed his brother. He had been lied to. All this time, Damien had carried guilt that didn't belong to him, had lived like a ghost because someone told him he had no place in the world of the living. Her eyes blurred with tears. How do you tell someone they spent their whole life grieving the wrong death? She didn't wait. She returned to the hospital that night, breathless and shaking. Damien was awake, sitting by the window, a blanket over his legs. He looked up as she entered, and for a second he smiled. But his smile faded when he saw her face. What is it? He asked. She didn't speak. She just crossed the room, sat beside him, and placed the box on his lap. He stared at it, then opened it. He read the first letter, then the second, then the third. His hand covered his mouth. The letter shook in his fingers. And finally, he broke. Not with anger, but with the kind of weeping that cracks a person from the inside out. A sound no heart should ever have to make. Sophia held him as he cried, held him the way no one had that night on the mountain. And with every tear, the weight on his soul seemed to lift, piece by broken piece. I thought I killed him, Damien whispered. I thought I lost him forever. You didn't, she whispered back. They took him from you. But you didn't stop loving him. That matters. They sat like that for a long time. Eventually, the sobs faded into silence. And in that silence, something unspoken passed between them. A new kind of truth. Not the kind you find in documents, but in the way two people choose to stay, even after the storm. Weeks passed. Damien's condition stabilized. The doctors adjusted his treatment. He would need time, maybe forever, to fully recover. But for the first time in years, he was willing to fight, and he wasn't fighting alone. Sophia didn't leave. She painted again, not out of escape, but out of hope. And one afternoon, as summer slipped into fall, they stood in front of a quiet cottage just outside the city. The sign on the door read, Michael's home. It was a new facility, beautiful, peaceful, and inside, at the end of a hallway, a man in his 30s looked up from a puzzle and smiled. Damien froze, then stepped forward. Michael. The man blinked. Then whispered, Damien. No music played, no grand speech, just two brothers, one lost, one found, walking slowly toward each other. And when they embraced, the world grew still. Sophia stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, and realized something. This story had never been about escape. It was about return, about healing the pieces we didn't know were still broken. That night, Damien proposed again, not with a diamond or a crowd or a contract, just with quiet eyes, a soft voice, and a question. Would you stay? Not because you have to, but because I'm finally someone who's ready to love you the way you deserve. Sophia nodded, not because he was rich, not because he'd changed, but because she had. And love, true love, had waited for both of them to grow into it. Not overnight, but exactly when it was meant to. Because some stories don't end with happily ever after, they begin with it. And this was just the beginning.